Let's talk about the shape tool and select and direct select tools. So unlike Photoshop, Illustrator has two types of selection tools. They're right here. This is the selection tool. This is the direct selection tool. And it's important to realize that they both have their usefulness. So the selection tool is probably more like the version in Photoshop where you can kind of select the object and you can, you can select the object and move it around. For example, I'm just moving it around. Oops, that time I think I grabbed something else. Let me delete that. Box. I'll make, you don't have to do that. Okay. The shortcut for the selection tool is V on your keyboard. You can just move it about however you like, just like in Photoshop, right? And in fact, you can rotate it, just like Photoshop. You can increase the size. FYI, there's a shortcut you can when you hold down Alt, instead of working from the corner, you work from the center. So if I let go of Alt, see I work from the corner, but if I hold down Alt, it's from the center. Right? And another useful tool is Shift. If you hold down Shift when resizing something, it keeps does what we call constraining the proportions. It keeps it in the same proportion that it had originally, instead of just getting now I'm letting go Shift and it'll let me change the proportions however I'd like, right? And then here's Shift, exact proportions that I had in the first place. All right. So that's what the selection tool does. Now the direct selection tool actually lets us select things called segments and anchor points. So you know that Photoshop is a bitmapped program. So it works in like with little pixels of color, but Adobe Illustrator is a vector based program. So it works with points and then saves them like it's sort of like coordinates in its memory, and then just draws lines, between all those coordinates. And so the line is called a path. And any path between two anchor points, there's an anchor point right there. There's an anchor point right there. You'll notice it gets a little bigger when I hover my cursor over it. Well, this is called one segment of the path. So this path is a rectangle, so it has 4 segments, 4 anchor points. Yeah, pretty elementary geometry, really, right? Now, your direct selection tool allows us to manipulate just one anchor point. Right? So I clicked it, and I'm just going to click and drag it, and you'll notice I'm able to contort the shape all I want. Right? So it's much more powerful than Photoshop at changing geometrical shapes. Because you can't really do this in Photoshop without going into some pretty complicated, like maybe the puppet warp or all sorts of trickery. This Illustrator makes this a little easier. So let's do a few other shapes. And we have the rounded rectangle tool, which does exactly what you think, little rounded rectangle. But actually, truth be told, you could just use the direct selection tool, and grab one of these little corner tools, and you can just pull them in if you want to round some points. So you can actually turn it into an oval if you want. So you can do that without using that specific tool anyway, but that's useful to have it there. Next is the Ellipse tool. This works exactly the way it does on Photoshop. You can just pull out, click and drag, and it makes an ellipse, or you can hold the Alt button, and it works from the center. If you hold down Alt and Shift, it'll work from the center and make a perfect circle. That's kind of cool. The polygon tool starts with an octagon. Wait, I'm sorry, hexagon. But if you just double click at any location of the screen, it'll bring you up a little options menu. And you can choose the radius and you can choose the number of sides.